Good afternoon. The National Assembly for Wales is now in session. And the first item this afternoon questions the First Minister. And question 1 is William Powell.
Diolch, Llywydd. Will the First Minister make a statement on the sustainability of GP practices in rural Wales?
Yes, GP services are provided by independent contractors. They enter into a contract with the LHBs and are responsible for delivering the contract that they have entered into. The new GP contract arrangements for Wales provide a new agreed mechanism for addressing sustainability of GP services in both rural and deprived communities.
Thank the First Minister for that response. There have been several examples in recent times across my region of poor practice in terms of public engagement when surgeries are either planning a reconfiguration or in some cases a cessation of service in a particular area. In one instance, for example, some patients first heard of the plans by seeing a poster up in the surgery itself. In this context, First Minister, and given the limited understanding in some quarters of the important role of community health councils with regard to this area of health service, what is the Welsh Government doing to promote better practice in terms of communications and public engagement in terms of GP services?
Well, it's absolutely critical that GPs themselves, as self-employed contractors, provide sufficient notice of their intentions and look for ways to preserve services in our communities. In particular, it's important that they discuss their needs with the local health board to see whether, in fact, their needs can be addressed. And I'd encourage any practice thinking of changing its surgery provision to work closely with the local health board in order to look to see if there is an alternative available that would still provide a service for local people.
George Watson.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, the Mid-Wales Health Study explored the challenge facing GPs and other community services, and I welcome the appointment of Dr Ruth Hall and Jack Evershed as joint chairs of the Independent Commission that will now take that work forward. But my question is, ahead of the Rural Health Conference in Newtown this Thursday, is whether you can outline what the next steps will be in terms of securing high-quality healthcare for people living in Mid-Wales.
Well, of course, the conference itself will help to inform the debate and to inform the future provision of healthcare in the middle of Wales. But of course, the Mid-Wales Healthcare Study provided recommendations on the opportunities and challenges for providing quality, accessible, safe and sustainable health service to the population of Mid-Wales. So the study is already there, and the conference, of course, will help to inform future service provision.
Darren Miller.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, one of the problems that is occurring more frequently in parts of rural Wales is that as a result of the erosion of the minimum practice income guarantee by as a result of the negotiations with the BMA and others, it's becoming more difficult to sustain very small rural practices in particular. What work are you going to do as a government to work with the GP profession to ensure that there is adequate access to services for those communities who might lose out as a result of some of these changes?
Well, the member will know, of course, that the Assembly's own audit committee expressed some reservations over this particular aspect, the minimum payment guarantee, and he will know that the current GP contract that has been agreed was agreed between government and with representatives of the profession in good spirit. That much is true. Any changes, I understand, will take place over 7 years, so there's ample time to adapt to the new system, and I'd encourage all GP practices, if they feel that they may have a difficulty with this, to talk to the local health board and, of course, to plan for the changes that their representatives have agreed with government.
Kirsty Williams.
First Minister, the sustainability agreement that has been reached between the Wales GPC and the Welsh Government, as announced last week, provides a real opportunity for the people of Llynnoedd Wales to maintain their practice, their surgery in that particular location. When will doctors be able to make a risk matrix application to the sustainability fund to be judged as to whether they can receive support to maintain services in areas such as Llynnoedd?
I'm familiar with the situation in Llynnoedd, not least because of the fact that I was there on Saturday, and so had the opportunity to discuss some of the issues. I wasn't canvassing, I can assure the member, but I was in Llynnoedd nevertheless and discussed the issue with people there. I mean, in terms of what's happening in Llynnoedd, I know the LHB have recently met with the practice to discuss some further income-generating initiatives. Those discussions are positive, I understand, in any event. There is, I understand, cautious optimism in terms of developing an agreeable solution, and I hope, given the views that were expressed to me on Saturday, that much is correct.
Gwenda Thomas.
Diolch Llywydd. First Minister, do you agree with me that it is a positive move that Abertawe, Bro Morgannwg and Hywel Dda Health Boards are cooperating to seek to provide cross-border primary care services in the Upper Aman and Swansea Valleys? And do you also concur with me that social services and the third sector must also cooperate in a similar fashion and be equal partners with the health boards?
Absolutely. She will know that I'm more than familiar with the communities that she's describing, particularly the communities of Lower Branhaman, of Gwaenca Gyrwen and Cwngors and Tadgwaith that are in Neath Talbot, but are often serviced from Carmarthenshire and have Carmarthenshire postal addresses, as she will know. And collaboration between the health boards is particularly important, and I understand there have been some positive moves in that regard. As far as social services are concerned, then obviously there must be cooperation between social services on both sides of the county boundary, and of course they need to work with the local health boards in order to provide a more seamless seamless care. As she will know, quite often social care provision is provided effectively across county the county border, and that is made available then to those living on the other side. In an area like the Upper Aman Valley, where the county follows the Aman River, it's absolutely crucial, of course, that communities are able to access services whichever side of the county boundary they like.
Question 2, William Graham.
Presiding Officer, will the First Minister outline Welsh Government collaboration with the UK Government to promote Wales during the visit to China by the Duke of Cambridge?
Yes, as part of the UK-China Year of Culture, which the Duke of Cambridge launched during his visit to China, the Welsh Government office in Chongqing has been working closely with the British Council to arrange a series of performances by Welsh musicians in 3 Chinese cities. And I can say that the Duke visited the Welsh Government office in Shanghai and indeed spent some time with our representative discussing what Wales could offer to inward investors and tourists from China.
Thank you very much for your reply, First Minister. You will know that the suggestion is that Chinese outward global investment for the next 5 years could grow from something like 65 billion to over 300 billion pounds. I'm sure you agree that Wales must be part of that. How can you accomplish this?
Well, we have our representative offices, of course, in China. They work very closely with UKTI, as members would expect. On my visit to China some years ago, the kind of investments that China were looking to make tended to be very large investments in the billions of pounds rather than the millions. That seems to have changed now because there are relatively few projects in Wales that fit that pattern. But nevertheless, good work is being done by our representatives and indeed the UKTI working with the Chinese authorities. And much work has been done in terms of building up the cultural links and also, of course, looking at attracting Chinese tourists into Wales.
Helen Parrott.
Josh Lewis, in May 2013, the Welsh Government signed a Memorandum of Understanding with UKTI to improve the promotion of Wales in UK Government-led visits and events internationally. So what increase year on year has there been in the number of leads created through UKTI-led visits since that MOU was signed?
Some leads are UKTI leads, some are Welsh Government leads, some are leads that are generated as a result of trade missions or ministerial visits. There's a mixture. We don't see this as a competition between ourselves and UKTI. In many instances, we've relocated our staff in UKTI offices. We believe that's the best way forward as far as Wales is concerned, and the two organisations working together are often able to generate leads as far as investment possibilities are concerned.
We now move to questions to the party leaders, and first this afternoon, Leader of Plaid Cymru, Leanne Wood.
Diolch Llywydd. First Minister, I'm sure nearly all Assembly members in this chamber will have had casework from people in areas relating to the funding of and the availability of new drugs and treatments. Now, the Health Minister has said, and I quote, "It is not acceptable to me that we have decisions being made in identical circumstances but made differently between one health board and another." I take it, First Minister, that you agree with your Health Minister, so I wonder if you could tell us what you intend to do about it, please.
Yes, there is an issue in terms of consistency of decision-making when it comes to IPFR requests. As a result of the review that we undertook, it is our intention to make sure that there is greater consistency there. We have looked at the idea of a national panel, but there is a question mark as to whether that panel will be able to get through the requests as quickly as we would want. but nevertheless consistency will be crucial in the future. We can't have a situation in the future where, and we've seen them, where people can't get access to one drug in one part of Wales but can in another. That consistency is going to be important.
There was a review of the IPFR process, but there are still concerns, First Minister, that this will not result in a national and consistent process for patients. The continued use of exceptionality criteria and standalone LHB panels will still lead to a postcode lottery on new drugs and treatment. Can you therefore confirm that decisions on these matters will still be made primarily with health boards?
Oh, the decisions will be made by clinicians. That's the important part here. The IPFR requests are dealt with by clinicians, they're not dealt with by politicians. They're not dealt with by those working in local health boards on their own. That much is important. That clinical input is absolutely crucial. She makes a good point, though, because with regard to the IPFR review process, achieving that greater level of consistency is something that we are looking to do. And she is right to point out that there have been instances in Wales where people have had access to drugs in one part of Wales but not another. Now, that must be eliminated, that much is true, and the IPFR review has allowed us to move to a situation where that consistency can be enforced.
Well, it's disappointing, First Minister, that you remain unable to assure patients that the postcode lottery will be abolished. Another element linked to this, of course, is the new rebate under the Pharmaceutical Price Regulation Scheme on new drugs and treatments. Now, the government could end the postcode lottery by introducing a national decision-making panel on new drugs and treatments and resourcing the decisions through the new rebate. Will the Welsh Government take the opportunity to ring-fence this rebate for new drugs and treatments?
Well, first of all, we already had one element of payment, £4 million in the last quarter. That's already been spent within the Welsh NHS, and part of the money will be used to make available orphan and ultra-orphan drugs, as the terminology has it. Now, I did note the announcement that was made by Plaid Cymru during the course of their conference. I saw the announcement about a ring-fenced general treatment fund, I think it's fair to say, without the need to demonstrate exceptionality. It's very difficult to comment on it because if there's no need to demonstrate exceptionality, the only other way of doing it is first come, first served, unless there are other criteria that are going to be imposed. So as far as we are concerned, we wait to see more details in terms of how that would operate before commenting on it, but I'm certainly with her in terms of saying that as far as the postcode lottery within Wales is concerned, the IPFR review gives us the opportunity now to look to eliminate it.
Can we move to the now Leader of the Welsh Liberal Democrats, Kirsty Williams?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, yesterday saw the publication of Professor John Furlong's report into teacher training in Wales. It's another week and another critical report into the state of education under your government. Could you outline to the Chamber today what steps you will take to improve the quality of teacher training in Wales?
No, this is a report that we ourselves commissioned. We wanted to make sure that the future provision of teacher training was right as far as Wales is concerned. I don't accept it's another critical report of the government, seeing as the government itself commissioned the report. But it is important that we get teacher training right in the future.
You're right. You keep on commissioning these reports, First Minister, and they keep telling you the same thing. You're not doing well enough. The report highlights how the current arrangements fall well short of the standards that will be required if your government implements the changes to the curriculum recommended by the Donaldson Review. If we want to achieve a world-class education system, we need to make sure we have the very best teachers delivering the very best curriculum. Would you guarantee today that any changes to the curriculum will happen in conjunction with an overhaul of the way in which we train our teachers?
Well, yes, that's stunningly obvious, I would have thought. We need to make sure that as we develop a new curriculum that's most appropriate for Wales, we have the teachers trained to deliver that curriculum. That stands to reason.
Well, I'm glad that we have some kind of logic in your education policy going forward. Now, the way to make sure that we attract the very best teachers into the profession is to ensure that teaching is held in the highest regard. And the highest quality candidates will be attracted to courses that are seen to be the very best they can be and academically rigorous. Now, Professor Furlong recommends that the current primary BA is replaced with a 4-year course where 50% of students' time is spent in main subject departments. Will you make sure that teachers educated in Wales benefit from the academic excellence needed and agree to move to a 4-year course?
Well, of course, this is one of the issues that we're considering. I mean, we're not responding to the furlong review today, but it's absolutely right to say that we want to make sure that teachers are as comprehensively trained as possible. I, for one, hold teachers in high regard as the son of 2 teachers, and something which certainly I very much valued. So what we have is a curriculum review looking to provide the best curriculum for Wales, a review looking at teacher training to provide the best levels of teacher training for Wales, and that is precisely what we intend to do, which is why we commissioned the reviews in the first place.
And finally, the opposition, Andrew Davis.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. First Minister, yesterday figures came forward that showed that in the last couple of years there's been 100,000 incidents of medical mishaps in hospitals, costing in negligence claims £210 million. One health board, for example, has had 6 never events reported in 1 calendar year. Do you believe that there should be a statutory obligation placed on health boards to inform patients and families when these events occur?
First of all, I would where events do happen, I expect families to be informed, of course. I would expect that to happen. Let's put this in context. I've seen the media story that states that more than 100,000 patients have been at least injured by medical blunders, as it was put, since 2010. There are 20 million hospital-based contacts. Let's put it into that context, but it's still, too many. I don't try and belittle it in any way. But I would remind members that Wales was at the forefront of the campaign to improve transparency. It was visible in the Saving 1,000 Lives campaign, and mortality information, of course, has been a key component of quality improvement in NHS Wales for almost a decade. So I would expect healthcare providers to be as open as possible with families.
Thank you for that, First Minister. And I do take that point that when you look at all the procedures across the NHS, this is a relatively small number, but still a significant number of poor procedures and the devastating consequences those procedures have led to allegations against medical staff and in particular claims against health boards. But I think we'd all have the expectation that families and patients would be informed when something goes wrong, but the evidence clearly points to the fact that that is not always the case, and in fact increasingly that information is being withheld from patients and families. So I think it's quite a simple question to say, do you not think, like other parts of the United Kingdom, we here in Wales should have the same statutory footing, because ultimately then there would be the guarantee in law that patients and families would have that information?
I do not think it is something that I would be opposed to in principle. We'd have to see how that would work in practice, but anything that can be done to improve transparency, where it's felt that transparency isn't as clear as it should be, is certainly something as a government we look to consider.
I am grateful for that relative endorsement of bringing forward some sort of statutory procedure that would ultimately guarantee that information to patients and families. And I hope that you will come forward in a timely manner with the way that you're going to take that forward. But how, in response to these figures, obviously £210 million has been paid out in recent years in litigation, that would have employed 9,000 nurses or 2,500 consultants. Eye-watering figures. And given the scale of the NHS, regrettably, there will always be some poor practice. None of us want to see that, but regrettably, there will always be an element of poor practice. What efforts are the Welsh Government doing to work with health boards to make sure that these figures are as low as possible and ultimately patients and clinicians are supported when these things do go wrong?
Well, we expect local health boards, of course, to take the right steps to make sure that the possibility of accidents or incidents is minimised. I have to say, based on experience in a previous life before I came here, that it's important that where it's felt that a claim is not a strong claim, that in fact it's resisted. There is a tendency sometimes to settle. It's a natural tendency, and sometimes settlements are made when perhaps the claim is not as strong as it might be. And it's important, of course, that local health boards assess the risks of a claim going to court. That's impossible. But also, of course, support medical staff, particularly where there are instances where it's felt the claim isn't a strong one at all. And it's for local health boards to decide whether, in fact, they should resist claims, and I would encourage them to do so if they feel that is the right thing to do, rather than looking necessarily to settle at the earliest opportunity where that's not appropriate.
We now move back to questions on the order paper, and question 3, Jonathan Saunders.
Presiding Officer, will the Minister make a statement on maternity services in Wales?
Yes. Our strategic vision for maternity services in Wales, which was published in September 2011, sets out the Welsh Government's expectations of NHS Wales in delivering safe, sustainable and high-quality maternity services.
Thank you, First Minister. Following your comments last week that you had not received a formal request from the CHC for you to intervene in Ysbyty Llawn and the decision by the board to remove consultant-led maternity services, I wrote immediately to the Chief Officer, who found your response to be quite bizarre, himself having written to the Health Minister asking him to intervene and commended him on taking forward the matter to a review. However, the CHC's members and officers met with the DCMO last week and were advised it was not a review, they were not considering statistical or clinical evidence, and the decision by the Health Board to move the service could not be altered. First Minister, you have the power, the authority, and I believe the moral duty to intervene in this process. Will you do this?
Well, the proper procedure has now been followed, and of course we will take on board the CHC's comments. I think it's right just to expand a little on this point. The Deputy Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Nursing Officer have been to the department and have looked at the situation there. It is not easy reading. Members will see the report that they have produced. There are no trainees there. They complain about the quality of their training, so they will not go back there. There's a real problem in recruiting middle-grade doctors, apart from locums, because of the difficult reputation that the department now has because of the two reports. But let's see how we can be positive here. In Withybush, when there were problems about the provision of 24-hour A&E, the consultants themselves came forward with ideas as to how that service could be continued. I'd invite the consultants in Ysbyty Llawn to come forward with some ideas now for the local health board to consider as to how the service can be maintained and kept safe, because it's quite clear it wouldn't be in the future. But if there are ways in which that can be done, if the consultants bring those views forward, I'm sure the local health board will give them due consideration.
Llyr Griffith.
Diolch Llywydd, I chi'n cyfeirio'n gyson at yr angen am dystiolaeth clinigol fel sail I benderfyniadau, ac wrth gwrs mae hynny'n gwbl resymol. Ond mae'n astudiaeth gan y King's Fund ar ail drefnu gwasanaethau clinigol wedi amlygu astudiaeth o enedigaethau yn Ffrainc, oedd yn dangos fod gorfod teithio dros 45 km yn cynyddu y risg o farwolaeth yn ystod y genedigaethau. Ac mae'n astudiaeth arall o'r iseldiroedd yn dangos fod gorfod teithio am fwy nag 20 munud hefyd yn cynyddu y risg yn sylweddol. Nawr, gyda ysbyty Gwynedd ag ysbyty Wrecsam Meilor dros 45 km I ffwrdd ac yn sicr dros 20 munud I ffwrdd, ond nid yw hynny yn codi cwestiynau sylfaenol ynglŷn â phenderfyniad y Bwrdd Iechyd yn y cyd-destun yma.
Wel, beth ni'n gwybod yw bod dystiolaeth dyn ni ar hyn o bryd, dystiolaeth cryf sydd yn dangos bydd y gwasanaeth ddim yn saff yn y pen draw. Allif neb osgoi hwnna, cwestiwn felly yw ym mha ffordd allwn ni sicrhau bod gwasanaeth saff yn y dyfodol. A wedi gweud yn blwm bag yn blaen, wedi gweud hwn i'r Bwrdd Iechyd I hunain, wy'n erbyn gweld y gwasanaeth nôl o fewn blwyddyn. Nawr, y problem yw, mae'n problem wedi bod yn ei recrwtio, ni'n gwybod hynny, sy'n pwynt mewn gros y tir na to, ond os mae yna ffordd I sicrhau gwasanaeth yn saff yn y dyfodol, os mae'r arbenigwyr a syniadau hunain, wel felly wrth gwrs, byddwn ni erbyn i'r Bwrdd Iechyd I wneud hynny. Mae wedi digwydd, byddwn sy'n ysbyty Llwynhelig, a felly os mae yna gynlluniau saff gallu cael ei ystyried gan y Bwrdd Iechyd yn y dyfodol, wel, digon hapus wrth gwrs yn siwr bydd y Bwrdd Iechyd I weld y cynlluniau hynny. Gai ddweud wrth aelodau hefyd bod ni fel Llywodraeth yn sicrhau bod ni'n cadw llygad barcud ar y broses mwyn sicrhau bod ni yn gweld pethau yn dod nôl I le dilyn o fod o fewn blwyddyn.
Alan Roberts.
Llywydd. Prif Weinidog, fel rhan o'r penderfyniad, fe drosglwyddwyd hefyd gwasanaethau llawdriniaethau'r frest o Fangor a Wrecsam I Llawn. Felly, gai ofyn I chi ystyried hynny fel rhan o'r broses o adolygu y penderfyniad. Ond gai hefyd dynnu'ch sylw chi at trafodaethau yn y bwrdd bore yma, lle mae rhai o peneithiad y bwrdd wedi deud bod I ddim yn bosib I gynnal gwasanaethau obstetric ar draws y tair safle i'r dyfodol, sydd yn wahanol iawn I beth wedwyd wrthyn ni fel aelodau cynulliad rhyw bythefnos yn ôl pan drafwyd I penderfyniad greiddiol. Felly, maen nhw'n newid I meddwl o wythnos I wythnos, a dwi'n meddwl dyna beth sy'n pryderu trigolion yng Ngogledd Cymru.
Wel, gai ddweud, wedi gweud o'r blaen, pan bydd y Syrnig yn dod I safle Llawn, bydd yna newidiadau yn yr adran eraill yn y Gogledd. Mae'n bwnd o ddigwydd o achos y ffaith bod yna adran newydd bydd yn rhoi mwy o wasanaethau, yn wedi wasanaethau arbenigol yn y pen draw. So mae hwnna'n iawn i ddweud. Ond, beth sy'n bwysig yw, ynglyn ag ysbyty Glan Clwyd, yw bod yr amserlen benodol yn cael ei ddal ati, sef 12 mis, ac wrth gwrs bod unrhyw syniadau eraill yn a chadw'r gwasanaeth i beth yn cael ei ystyried. A dyna beth, wrth gwrs, byddwn ni'n gofyn i'r arbenigwyr i wneud. Wrth gofio'r problemau sydd wedi bod yn yr adran ei hunan, nawr yr amser, wrth gwrs, i nhw dynnu gyda'i gilydd mwyn sicrhau bod na gynlluniau eraill gallif y bwrdd iechyd i ystyried.
Question 4, Keith Davis.
Diolch Llywydd. A wnaeth Prif Weinidog roi'r wybodaeth diweddar am y camau mae Llywodraeth Cymru yn ei cymryd i gefnogi yr economi yng Ngorllewin Cymru.
Wel, mae'n cynlluniau ar gyfer sicrhau twf economaidd a swyddi canoliadwy wedi nodi yn y rhaglen lywodraethu ac wrth gwrs ni'n parhau i sicrhau twf economaidd yn y gorllewin.
Diolch. Roedd ymweliad y Pwyllgor Menter a Busnes i Fanceinion wrth yswetha'n dangos manteision economaidd o awdurdodau yn cydweithio ar wella rwydweithiau lleol. Ydych chi'n cytuno fi, Prif Weinidog, bydd yr anbarthau dinesig yng Nghymru llawn cystel i gynnyrchu buddsoddiad mewnol ac felly gwella economi yn yr anbarthau?
Yn hollol, ni wedi gweld wrth gwrs yr enghraifft sydd wedi cael ei roi gan Fanceinion a hefyd wrth gwrs beth sydd wedi cael ei wneud fanna. Does dim reswm wrth gwrs pam ddyle'r rhanbarthau dinesol yng Nghymru wneud yr un peth, ac wrth gwrs bod nhw'n gweithio dros ffiniau. A ni'n gweld hwnna wrth gwrs yn rhanbarth Abertawe, ac wrth gwrs yn rhanbarth Caerdydd.
Paul Davis.
Diolch Llywydd. Prif Weinidog, beth sy'n hanfodol i wella'r economi yng Ngorllewin Cymru yw ein bod ni'n gweld gwell is-deitlau yn yr ardal. Byddwch chi yn ymwybodol bod i'n credu byddai troi'r A40 yn Sir Benfro yn ffordd ddeuol yn helpu wella'r economi yng Ngorllewin Cymru. Dwi'n derbyn fod y gweinidog trafnidiaeth yn ystyried y mater, ond gallwch chi ddweud wrthon ni pryd byddwch chi fel Llywodraeth nawr mewn sefyllfa i adrodd ar y mater pwysig hyn?
Wel, mae hwnna'n cael ei ystyried ar hyn o bryd. Ni wedi gweud wrth gwrs bod hwnna'n rhywbeth byddwn ni'n gefnogol o. Mae rhaid ni ystyried wrth gwrs sefyllfa ariannol, ond yn deall, yn enwedig ar ôl gweld cae plant Myrco yn Aberdagleddau, bod hwn yn rhywbeth yn ei moyn symud mlaen gyda mor gyntaf sy'n bosib.
Roger Glyn Thomas.
Prif Weinidog, mae yna lawer iawn o syniadau yn cael eu cynnig ynglyn â sut i hyrwyddo yr economi yng Ngorllewin Cymru, ond o ystyried fod y Gorllewin wedi derbyn cefnogaeth o'r cronfeydd strwythurol ers degawd a hanner, ers 15 mlynedd bellach. Ond i bryd i ni edrych ar y sefyllfa yn ei gyfanrwydd, ac ond oes na angen i ni edrych am sefydlu rhywbeth fel yr hen fwrdd datblygu gwledig yn y Gorllewin er mwyn hyrwyddo'r economi ac hefyd o bosib hyrwyddo'r iaith Gymraeg yr un pryd.
Na, dwi'n credu byddai cwango yn ateb i'r sefyllfa hyn. Ond gai ddweud, mae rhaid ni wrth gwrs i ystyried yn fanwl ym mha ffordd bydd unrhyw cyllido newydd Ewropeaidd sydd yn dod i Gymru yn gallu cael ei ddefnyddio mewn ffyrdd gwahanol mwyn cael yr impact mwyaf ar yr economi. Ac wrth gwrs, mae pethau wedi bod yn anodd yn y Gorllewin, wrth gwrs beth sydd wedi digwydd yn Myrco, rhywbeth nath nineb yr Llywodraeth a Llywodraeth Unedig weithio'n galed i geisio osgoi. Ond os ydych chi ar y raglen lywodraethu, mae'n hollol clir ynglyn â beth yw nod y Llywodraeth Cymru ynglyn â'r Gorllewin a gweddill Cymru.
Peter Black.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, the M4 is a vital economic lifeline to West Wales, and of course one of the reasons given for closing Junction 41 is so that we improve road links to settlements to the west of Port Talbot. However, the impact on Port Talbot has been effectively a declining footfall, as evidenced by the government's own figures. At least 3 or 4 shops closed since Christmas, and of course Chamber of Trade estimated 20% fall off in trade. Is Port Talbot being sacrificed for the benefits of the economic vitality of those settlements to the west of it?
No, Port Talbot isn't being sacrificed for Neath or Swansea. The reality is that we have in the overhead section of the M4 Port Talbot slip roads and junctions that are well below the standard that we would build now. And we know that they've caused problems in terms of the traffic flow on the M4 itself. I have said before, of course, that we will look to evaluate once the trial comes to an end the results of that trial with a view to looking at what then happens in Port Talbot. But we'll approach that with an open mind.
Question 5, Bethan Jenkins.
Will the First Minister outline how Natural Resources Wales works with local authorities?
Well, it works with local authorities on a range of activities, including flood risk management and coastal erosion, fly tipping and regulatory enforcement. It's also a statutory consultee for planning applications.
Thank you for the answer, Minister. The Neath Matawba Council has suggested to a constituent of mine, and yours actually, that NRW has not been supportive in finding a solution for the open cast void at Margam. NRW has said it can only act after there has been a water breach at Margam. Do you know if this is the case, as NRW has stated that they don't know whether or not any calculations have been made to determine if the discharge consents in place for Margam are sufficient to drain the void, or how long that would take? The constituent feels that responsibility has been pushed from NRW to the local authority vice versa. We would like some clarity on the issue.
Well, NRW have been asked by the local planning authorities concerned to undertake regular testing and monitoring of the water at Park Slip, for example. It's an old problem, one that I've been involved in for more than 10 years, and others here as well. The fundamental problem, as she will know, is the water level in the void at Park Slip and the need to keep on pumping to make sure it doesn't go up to a level that will be regarded as unsafe. But the fundamental problem is that there isn't enough money that's been set aside in order to pay for the restoration of that site, or indeed the East Pit. And she will know, and I know she takes the same view as me on this, that there is a responsibility, I believe, on the UK government, because this is 20 years ago this happened, to make sure there are sufficient funds available in order to restore these sites, because at the time the privatisation of British Coal occurred, a deliberate decision was taken not to require operators to put aside sufficient money as a bond. And now, of course, 20 years on, communities are seeing the difficulties that is causing.
David Rees.
First Minister, when NRW was actually established, there was concern of its abilities to actually separate its regulatory role from its commercial activities role, particularly in the area of forestry of land on behalf of the Welsh Government. There's presently a planning application for exploratory boreholes within the Carmarthen area in my constituency, and it's on NRW managed forestry. I've become aware that NRW actually have flattened the piece of land where they intend to do that work prior to that application actually being decided upon. What actions can the Welsh Government take to ensure and reassure local residents that NRW works with local authorities transparently?
Absolutely. NRW are not a planning authority, of course. They are there as a statutory consultee. It's for the local planning authority to decide how it moves forward in terms of any planning application, but certainly there can be no question of any kind of predetermination in that sense by NRW. They're not involved in the planning system in terms of being a decision-making body.
Antoinette Sandage.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, I'm sure you'll be aware of the works in Llanrwst in North Wales, where council flood alleviation work led to an important trout river being destroyed, and in particular gravel being removed during the season that fish would be laying their eggs. That's one of the poor examples of NRW working with a local council. What are you doing to identify bad practice and make sure that it doesn't happen again, particularly where there are the conflicts, the types of conflicts of interest that David Rees highlighted in his earlier question?
Well, we would obviously expect NRW to comply with the law, and we expect NRW to comply with the requirements upon them to ensure that spawning beds, particularly for migratory fish, are not disturbed, as they will be required, of course, to structure their operations so as not to interfere with the spawning season for brown trout, particularly in our rivers, and indeed to where they have responsibilities to maintain hedgerows, to observe the law in that regard as well. So they, of course, they are bound to observe not just the law, but also good practice in terms of the environment.
Question 6, Lee Griffith.
Diolch Llywydd. A wnaeth y Prif Weinidog datganiad am y cyhoeddiad dydd Gwyldewi ynglyn â datganoli mwy o'r ymoedd i Gymru?
Naf, wrth gwrs, nes I datganiad ar hwn wrthos diwetha yn y cynulliad.
Wel, un o'r meysydd sydd am gael i datganoli, wrth gwrs, yw maes trwyddedu ar gyfer ffracio ac echdynnu nwyon eraill ar y tir. Ond allwch chi ddweithio ni, Prif Weinidog, o dan y setliad presennol o safbwynt y grymoedd sydd gan eich llywodraeth chi ar hyn o bryd, allwch chi gadarnhau os gan eich llywodraeth chi y pwerau i gyflwyno moratoriwm ar ffracio yng Nghymru?
Ynglŷn â'r system cynllunio, mae'r Gweinidog wedi gweud bod hwn yn rhywbeth sydd yn mwy na lai wedi digwydd, ond wrth gwrs mae'n wir i weid bydd mwy o reolaeth sydd system trwyddedu hefyd wedi cael ei ddatganoli hefyd.
Yes or no?
Nick Ramsey.
Yes or no? First Minister, the St David's Agreement was a good news story for Wales in many ways, wasn't it? Not least because of the devolution of, you just mentioned fracking, but large-scale energy projects, but also the commitment to a proper funding floor for Wales along with those powers. Do you agree with me that the proposed funding floor to the Barnett formula has been needed for a long time? Your government has called for this for a long time, and it is one way of ensuring that as the economy improves under the auspices of the UK coalition government, then funding within Wales is now more likely to keep pace with funding in England, certainly compared with under previous years of Labour administration.
Well, I mean, we're in a position where we are 5 years on, and it took us 5 years to get to a position where something was agreed in principle. I think the member misunderstands where the Barnett works. The Barnett floor applies when public spending increases. And that's where the floor comes into operation. It doesn't affect the general state of the economy, doesn't affect the operation of Barnett or indeed of the Barnett floor. It's public spending that affects it. But, well, there we are. There is a recognition in principle that Wales is underfunded. Unfortunately, however, at this point in time, no timescale as to how that will be addressed.
Question 7, Russell George.
Will the First Minister make a statement on school funding in Powys?
Yes, Powys's budgeted net revenue expenditure on education is 97.6 million. Including funding from other sources, Powys's gross budgeted expenditure on schools is 108.8 million, and that equates to £5,880 per pupil.
Thank you for your answer, First Minister. You will be aware of the funding pressures that local authorities are facing, which inevitably will impact on the school's budget. There is some concern in my constituency that the provision of bilingual education will be disproportionately affected due to the fact that it requires additional resource. What assurance can you give me and to my constituents in this regard?
Well, we have protected frontline spending on schools. We expect local councils, of course, to pass that funding on, but it is for local authorities to explain the funding decisions that they take. But I'm sure they are relieved to know they don't have to put up with your party's plans, which are 12% cut for local government and a 20% cut on education spending.
Simon Thomas.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. There are concerns in Powys regarding reorganisation and Welsh language provision and sixth form provision in particular. Do you agree with me, First Minister, that changes driven by school standards or improving standards or changes driven by school places can be justified, but changes that are driven simply by a lack of resources are not? And can you therefore confirm that your protection for school spending does not apply to 16 plus and you have actually cut funding for 16 plus education?
It's right to say that the protection is there for schools and not for colleges. That much is true. It's also right to say that changes to education provision should not be primarily driven by cost. That much is true. It should be down to standards, and it should be down to ensuring the best education for children. And we would expect, of course, Powys to have passported the protection that we put in place for schools' cash budget in order for them to spend that on schools.
Question 8, Susie Davis.
How does the Welsh Government ensure that local authorities are spending their allocated fund wisely?
Well, it's a matter for each local authority, of course, but in making those decisions, they should take account of local needs and priorities and, of course, engage with their communities.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. Just by way of example, you know that Bridgend County Borough Council, covering your own constituency, has faced considerable unanticipated expenditure this year through its own questionable decisions, legal costs for its failure to follow procedures in connection with Tynrell School and removal of the silt mound in Porthcawl. In your opinion, should that unanticipated expenditure be met from reserves, this year's large increase in council tax, a reduction in services or another source? And what guidance is there to support your opinion?
It's a matter for them, of course, but I'm sure she'll welcome the fact that Bridgend has opened 3 brand new comprehensive schools under Labour leadership. I'm sure she will be happy with the fact that new schools are yet planned, primary schools. I'm sure she will very much welcome the fact that the council are now moving forward with redevelopment of the Jennings building in Porthcawl, which of course will help to redevelop the harbour, building on top of the marina, the harbour gate rather, that's been put there, and of course the proposed development elsewhere around the harbour. So I think Bridgend County Borough Council, far from being criticised, are to be commended for the investment they've made in schools and indeed in Porthcawl.
Roger Glyn Thomas.
Prif Weinidog, mae cronfeydd wrth gefn sydd yn cael ei cadw gan awdurdodau lleol i fod i gael ei defnyddio mewn sefyllfaoedd argyfyngus. O ystyried y toriadau sydd yn gwynebu awdurdodau lleol leded Cymru a dyddiau yma, ond ydyw y dyddiau hyn yn dyddiau argyfyngus ac ond i ddyle cynghorau edrych ar y cronfeydd yma wrth gefn fel ffyrdd o sicrhau nad yw gwasanaethau sylfaenol yn cael eu torri.
Mae hwnna'n bwynt wrth gwrs, a mae'n bwynt teg i awdurdodau lleol i ofyn i hunain. Ni wedi gweud wrth awdurdodau lleol bod pethau yn anodd ar hyn o bryd, does dim sôn bod pethau'n gwella dros yn y tymor hir. Yn yr un ffordd i ni wedi goffod dangos disgyblaeth ariannol ynglyn â chyllideb ni, byddwn ni erbyn i awdurdodau lleol wneud yr un peth. A lle mae fe'n iawn, lle mae nhw'n twmobl yn iawn i ddefnyddio mwy o arian wrth gefn, wrth gofio sefyllfa ariannol, mae hwnna'n wrth gwrs yn rhywbeth byddwn ni'n annog i nhw i wneud ac o lia i feddwl amdano.
Cwestiwn 9, David Ellis-Thomas.
Diolch yn fawr, Bones. Pa drafodaethau mae Prif Weinidog wedi cael gyda Prif Weinidog y Deyrnas Unedig am amserlen weithredu ar gyfer y materion lle ynodwyd bod consensws yn atodiad a y papur gorchymyn pwerau at bwrpas?
Dim i'r ateb, yn aneb arall waith, dwi'n credu. Ond wrth gwrs, dwi'n siŵr bydd hwn yn rhywbeth bydd yn bwnc llosg ar ôl yr etholiad cyffredinol.
Wel, dwi'n siomedig iawn nad ydy Prif Weinidog y Deyrnas Unedig yn gweld yn dda i drafod yn gyson gyda Prif Weinidog Cymru. Ond dwi am ofyn yn benodol am yr hannau o'r papur sy'n ymwneud ag etholiadau i Gynulliad Cenedlaethol Cymru. Lle mae'r Llywodraeth y Deyrnas Unedig yn cytuno bod yna ddadl gref o blaid datganoli cymwyseddau deddfwriaethol a gweithredoedd llawn yng nghyswllt cynnal etholiadau'r Cynulliad. A'n nghwestiwn i yw hyn, pe byddai hyn yn digwydd yn yr Alban ar gyfer etholiad Senedd yr Alban 2016, a fyddai'r Prif Weinidog o'r farn fod yn briodol i hynny ddigwydd hefyd yng Nghymru?
Os mi'n gallu cael ei wneud mor gyflym yna i'r Alban, felly does dim reswm pam dylai hwnna hefyd ddim i ddigwydd yng Nghymru, yn fy marn i. Byddwn ni'n uchel geisiol i weld y newidiadau hyn yn digwydd cyn yr etholiad nesaf, ond os mae'n unrhyw sôn bod hynny'n mynd i ddigwydd yn yr Alban yn gyflym iawn, wel, pam na felly yng Nghymru?
Andrew Archie Davis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, we had a debate last week in which I might have misunderstood you, but I think you were indicating that you didn't believe there was an agreement around the St David's Day proposals. I'd just like to understand that, is it your understanding that whilst obviously you might have wished more or less even in that agreement, it is definitely an agreement and it's an understanding that whoever wins the general election in May, those proposals will be taken forward and will be legislated on so those powers and responsibilities can come here to the Senedd?
Well, I'm sure there are other parties in the chamber who would take the same view as me and say, well, there was no agreement. We were never asked to agree, to come to a formal agreement in the same way as has happened in other parts of the UK. Nevertheless, he's right to say, of course, that what appears in that document represents what is common ground pro tem, if I can put it that way, but certainly not an agreement. I would never have agreed, for example, to air passenger duty not being devolved. I'm never going to agree to that. I would not agree to policing not being devolved, and other parties will take their own view in terms of what they would have actually agreed to. But nevertheless, it represents, as it were, what is common ground thus far between the parties.
Question 10, Mike Hedges.
What action is the Welsh Government taking to reduce the problem of isolation and loneliness in elderly people?
Well, our strategy for older people sets out our commitment to tackling isolation and loneliness, and we are funding, for example, befriending schemes across Wales to reduce the number of older people feeling lonely or isolated.
Following the success of the free bus travel and the Advantage scheme, as well as the befriending schemes in Wales in dealing with loneliness in elderly people, what further plans does the Welsh Government have to reduce loneliness and isolation?
Well, we already invest £428,500 a year in third sector grants to help fund befriending schemes across Wales to tackle isolation and loneliness. And a good example of this investment is the Royal Volunteer Service Newport Good Neighbours scheme. That includes over 300 hours of support a month provided by 50 volunteers through one-to-one visits with older people. And I know that they also have services elsewhere in Wales. What we hope to see, of course, is schemes like that continue in the future, expand in the future, and then, of course, we will see what money can be made available to fund them.
Mark Ishwood.
Thank you. And of course, I also commend the excellent Gofal befriending scheme in North Wales, launched by the Red Cross with lottery money. But key to this agenda is co-production, breaking down the barriers between service users and professionals. How do you therefore respond to the call, which was put in a letter to you backed by 120 practitioners and organisations across Wales, for a formal independent member-led co-production network for Wales, underpinned by a shared understanding of the term with the Welsh Government?
Well, these are matters that the Minister will be keeping under consideration. It's always a mistake, isn't it, to mention one particular service. There'll be others who will feel they should have been mentioned. I thank the member for mentioning another service there, and indeed all services across Wales that provide so much valuable companionship to so many of our older people. But we will keep under consideration, of course, any suggestions that will help to improve the service that already exists.
Lindsay Whittle.
Well, First Minister, we face a particular problem in terms of loneliness with older men, and there's a tendency for men to maintain fewer close social relationships than women over the course of their lives, and a lot of men will often avoid efforts to bring them into social contact through voluntary efforts as well. Do you agree that we need a strategy specifically tailored to combat loneliness in older men, taking into account the unique challenges that older men face, to ensure that all of Wales benefits?
Well, RVS has set up a befriending scheme for men, working with rugby clubs across the UK. The aim of the scheme is to support older men to continue to socialise, whether it's going with them to a game or going to a pub to watch a game with somebody else. And that then, of course, it is hoped, will increase the number of men who volunteer as well. So the RVS already have a scheme in place, although I suspect you have to be a rugby fan to benefit the greatest from it.
Thank you, First Minister.